This episode is brought to you by the Command Presence Leadership Institute. Find out more by visiting commandpresence.net.
Welcome to the Faces of Leadership with Michael Warren. Be the leader you wish that you had.
Welcome to the Faces of Leadership podcast, where we believe that leadership is about two things. It's about people and it's about actions. We talk with leaders from across society who are stepping up to do what they can, where they are, with what they have. The question is, what can we learn from them? What can we learn from each other as we strive to be the leader we wish we had? Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Warren, and I'm your host. Thank you for being with us today. Folks, before we get started today, I have got to throw this in there, okay? Please tell me that you have listened to episode 14 with Karen Brash. I love talking with all our guests. You know that I talk every week about how excited I am. But Karen was especially fun. Her outlook on life in general and her perspectives on leadership were so enlightening and authentic. Plus, she's a freaking helicopter pilot. So how could it not be a good conversation? And she at least pretended like she understood when I referenced the movie Titanic in there. So how could that not be a good conversation, folks? By the way, during the episode, she recommended a book called The Grit Factor by her friend Shannon Huffman Polson. Fantastic book so far. In fact, today I'm driving up north, and I believe I will finish it up in the first half of the trip. So I want to thank her for that recommendation. I do have to say something, folks. Our sponsor is the Command Presence Leadership Institute. And we had an interesting thing here recently that I was involved in with them. We actually had a Faces of Leadership community event in Brunswick, Georgia. This event happened to be sponsored by American Express, and this wasn't law enforcement. This wasn't even corporate. This was members of the community. We all came together for a day and we talked about leadership. We had 5 different instructors from all types of different industries. It was such a great experience. I'm hoping that we're going to have future events like that. But on to today's rock star, if we can. Our guest today, he began his law enforcement career late in 2001 at the Alpharetta Police Department in Alpharetta, Georgia. He left Alpharetta in 2011 to work at the Powder Springs Police Department, where he became the chief of police in 2015. He was fortunate, and as the chief likes to say, he was blessed enough to be able to return to Alpharetta in January of 2017 as the public safety chief, and that's where he's currently serving. He's a strong believer in education. In fact, he received his Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from Georgia State University way back in 1993. In 1998, he earned a Master of Divinity degree from New Orleans Seminary, and in 2014, he earned a Master of Justice Administration degree from Columbus State University. In 2019, he earned his Doctorate of Public Administration from Valdosta State University, and he is also a graduate of the Northwestern School of Police Staffing Command. By the way, folks, quick break here. I would love to see his sweatshirt collection representing all of the institutions of which he is an alumnus. But anyway, he began work as an instructor at Reinhardt University's Police Academy in 2009 and has served as an instructor numerous times for several Georgia post-training academies. He also continues to serve as an adjunct instructor for Reinhardt's Public Safety Leadership Bachelor of Science program. And this right here, folks, this is no lie. He has spent a great deal of time studying leadership in law enforcement as well as the private sector in general. His goal, and if you've listened to any of our previous episodes, folks, I think you have a pretty clear understanding of how important it is to have a clear goal. But his goal is to be a transformational leader in his current role as public safety chief. And the transformational leadership style is at the heart of what he teaches and speaks on anytime he is offered the opportunity. The transformational leader inspires others to be their best and works to create an environment where employees feel valued and realize they are a vital part of the organization. His experience and research have demonstrated to him that making leadership about those you lead is a tremendous benefit to the employee as well as to the organization. And folks, the reason why he's on the podcast is because he doesn't just preach it, he also practices it. So everybody, please welcome Chief John Robison to the podcast. Chief, thanks for being on here today.
Hey, Mike. I appreciate you having me on here, man. It's always good to chat with you and to talk about the good topic of leadership. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, it's interesting, Chief, because in our intro, we asked the question, what can we learn from each other? And I know that that's a big principle upon which Command Presence was founded and how they operated. But I appreciate the fact that you have been willing to invest in me, that you have shared your knowledge and your experience with me. We were talking before, folks, but we were talking before we got on here about modern travel. I'm in the midst of a very busy travel schedule, but one of the best things that has ever happened to me is when I get to travel with the Chief, because he's willing to share. And folks, that time is invaluable from your current position as the Director of Public Safety, as Chief. How do you go about being intentional about sharing your knowledge and your experience with the people that, as I like to say, you have been entrusted with in your organization?
Let's just start with like command staff, all my leaders. You know, we have been intentional. I'll go down two roads here: the intentional and then just the opportunistic. The intentional, we've tried to be very intentional with this, and we still aren't where we need to be. But you know, we've started something called the Alpharetta Leadership Institute, and so once a quarter, all our supervisors from sergeant above are required to come a couple hours. We give a couple of days opportunity, and so they come in, and so we spend a couple of hours on leadership development topics. I may do something, one of our other commanders, we may bring somebody in from the outside and try to get another voice in there. And then we also spend a couple of hours on practical stuff, like the last one we just had, and many people listening can probably appreciate this. Just as an example, I've got 4 patrol shifts, A, B, C, and D, and sometimes those 4 shifts do things 4 different ways when it comes to simple things like, how do we document travel and training and taking time off and overtime and things like that. So from a practical standpoint, we bring them in and we get everybody on the same page. We changed our discipline policy last year, so we use that as an opportunity to work with everybody to hear, one voice, one message. This is how we're going to apply this policy, get input from them, that kind of thing. So from an intentional standpoint, that's something we've recently started doing just in the last year or two, where we're, again, trying to be in that mode of leadership development all the time, talking about transformational leadership, talking about what, our expectations are, fundamentals, things like that. And so that's intentional. Every month, I meet with our command staff and we go through books together. We do the typical stuff. So I think we don't do anything much different than probably what some of the listeners do. The unintentional, or what I call opportunistic, is really what I've learned over the years, Mike. And it's funny, you mentioned like our conversations, and I still remember us talking when we were in Tennessee. We spent several hours together going back and forth and going to the airport, and even in that conversation with you and when we really, I think, clicked on some topics. But I think one of the ways that we as leaders can be valuable to all those that we get a chance to have influence over is being transparent. And transparent is, what's working, what's good, what are our expectations, but also being willing to be transparent about, wow, this has been harder than I thought, or I fell flat on my face with this one. The old Jocko ownership thing. And if you mess up, you fess up, and, fail forward is one of our fundamentals, and talking about that. And so when we as leaders fail forward, also using that as opportunities to be real about that. And so I think from my perspective, in doing this a few years now, you definitely want to be intentional. You want to be organized in how you approach developing our people, sending them to good training, sending them to command presence type classes, things like that. But also just that day in and day out interaction. I went to roll call a couple of nights ago, and so just those impromptu moments where we're just talking and engaging, and I try to be sure and be real. One of the things that's interesting in my position, a lot of people in positions like mine, is I think sometimes tend to think we can't share, and we have to hold the power in the corner, and there's only certain things we need to put out there. And there's some HR related stuff, and there's certain topics we have to be careful about. But I've learned in this, Mike, that like 95% of what I know, what I do, what we do, we should be sharing, because again, what do we say transformational leadership is? It's connecting with a team. It's creating a culture where they feel like they are valued. They feel like they matter. And one of the greatest ways we can show value to our employees is by communicating with them, by letting them hear from us, and also creating opportunities to hear from them and having that open channel communication back and forth. So that's the good stuff. That's the intentional stuff, but also sometimes the stuff where we messed this up and we've got to change, or we got to do this. And when we do change, not just saying what we're doing, but give them the why. That's one of our favorite phrases, is don't just tell them what, tell them the why. So all that also, I think, falls under the umbrella of trying to, develop our people, whether it be the intentional path or just more making sure we're being opportunistic.
Well, Chief, one of the things, because you and I have been doing the training side for a while, and it's interesting that you talked about in your intentional development of your people that you will bring in people from the outside. And so one of the things that I have noticed, and I think maybe you have too, is that there are some leaders who seem reluctant to bring in the outside voice, to get that outside perspective. Why do you think that's so valuable? What do you gain by bringing in somebody that's not working in the organization to speak to your leadership team?
That's a great question. I think part of it, and I'm not sure I can give the why on this, but there's just a human nature aspect that after, like I've been Alpharetta in this position for 7.5 years now. Same voice, typically same message overall, and we want to be, consistent in that. Like Lencioni says, my job is to be the chief reminding officer, the CRO, to remind what's important. But for whatever reason, there seems to be an effectiveness with bringing somebody else from the outside in, even if it's somewhat the same message, or maybe it's the core message being presented in a different manner, but outside voices just seem to bring a fresh, different perspective. And you're right. I think some people are, this is where, some pride and ego can get in the way of being an effective leader. We want to be the guy. I want to be the guy, right? I want to be the leader that, hey, they're looking to me, Chief Robison, and he's leading us, and that's good, but that's not always the most effective way, because same voice over and over again, even if the messaging is effective and correct, I think human nature is that it's just good to have a fresh voice and a fresh perspective and an objective person to come in from the outside, including, the willingness to have somebody come in from the outside and go, hey, just from my observation, these are some areas you might want to think about, or I've noticed this. I talked to a chief yesterday that's new in a position down in South Georgia, and he was asking some questions and asking about maybe me coming down and meeting with their command staff. And I told him, I said, listen, you're new in the position, but just the fact you're willing to have somebody else come in, like me or whoever, and talk to your staff and hear from them in an effort to try to look at the culture and try to make good changes and do things the right way. I said, man, that says a lot about you right there. You're coming in the door with the right perspective, with the right attitude. And so I think that's a lot of it, again, is us pushing our ego aside and wanting to be like, I want to come in and make this right, and I want to make this better, or I want to be the guy. And that's okay. We do want to be the guy, but part of being the guy or the gal, the leader, is the willingness to do whatever it takes to make sure we are constantly sharpening our people. And a lot of times sharpening our people means bringing in some saws, if you will, from other places and other sources.
Chief, I'm not going to call you a dork. I will call me a dork. All right. There's a song, I think it's by Imagine Dragons, that says, whatever it takes.
That's right.
Breaking the chains. I love the adrenaline going through my veins. And I think that's the feeling that truly engaged leaders get when they see the development of their people, when they see their people. And listen, from an ego perspective, I want my people to respond to me. But listen, if it's what it takes is for them to get the message, to understand the mission, if that means bringing somebody in from the outside, as long as they get it, man, once they get it, that's a powerful, powerful engine, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And when you have that get it moment, or that, and there is also, and this is not why we do it, Mike, but there is also the opportunity sometimes for somebody else to come in. And again, the messaging may be similar, or the core message may be the same. And they go, oh, so that stuff I've been hearing from the chief and from my command staff is, okay, I get it now, or hey, maybe they actually know what they're talking about,
right.
Sometimes too. So it can create some credibility for us. But at the end of the day, to your point, the number one goal should be, and that's another one of our fundamentals. I literally have on our wall downstairs outside of roll call in large letters, make it better. That's been one of our favorite phrases is, as good as we may be in whatever area, pick a topic, we always want to strive to make it better. And so obviously from my perspective, and when it comes to developing our people, we want to make it better. And if making it better means bringing other people in to help do that, to help craft the overall message of the, the transformational leadership approach and what we're trying to do in our community, then absolutely. So again, we have to be willing to kind of put that ego aside a little bit and just say whatever it takes to get there and be willing to make that happen.
Well, Chief, I think there's an added benefit that's not, it's not a pleasant one, but it is a benefit. I think a lot of times leaders recognize when there's somebody on the team that just isn't fitting in. And I'm not talking about that they're introvert or whatever. What I'm talking about is they choose to fight the culture. They don't want to be a part of the culture. They don't want to be a part of the team. And oftentimes, if you bring in somebody from the outside that's objective, that, as they say, doesn't have any skin in the game, oftentimes it will not force, but it will encourage the leader with formal authority to go and do something about it. Because when somebody that's objective recognizes there's an issue and you've been thinking there is an issue, then guess what? There's probably an issue.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. And of course, internally, absolutely. And I have seen that with our own team at times. But just, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, I was teaching 2 days at in another state. And this agency had gone through a very difficult time with their former leader a few years ago, honestly, getting indicted federally. And so they had to, they've been through a lot. And so I came in and did, for command presence, what we call leading without rank, which is for your line level folks, and the whole idea of, you don't have to have rank to be a leader. It's one of my favorite classes. And so listening to them the day before, I met with the executive staff to do an executive leadership class, and they all were kind of tiptoeing around a little bit at first, some of the issues they were having. But at the end of the day, it was very clear this was about one person on command staff. It was literally about one. It was that organizational terrorist that we call them sometimes, that cancer, whatever. And so to your point, there was some conversations that happened and you've been there, Mike, like we have to kind of figure out like, what is our role in this? We don't want to be, coming in just hammering somebody,
right.
but at the same time, I feel like it is beneficial. Just like if I was in that sheriff's role, the new sheriff, I'd be like, I'd want to hear this. Right. And to your point, there was a willingness to accept the fact from some other leadership. We got a problem with one particular person, especially. And this has been a long drawn out thing for years. And this is probably not going to change, or he's probably not going to change. And of course you want to go through and do all the right things to give him that opportunity. But to your point, at least get on the radar and have a willingness to step back and go, all right, we've got to look at this because this is a problem. And so, yes, absolutely. There should be a willingness always to make sure we're not looking through a tunnel vision here, but we're seeing things with open eyes and open minds and understand that there may be a problem there that we haven't done a good job of recognizing. And sometimes it takes somebody else coming in to go, you might want to look over here a little bit more. And that's where, assessments and bringing in, again, people from the outside and to meet with staff and do things like that. There's a variety of ways to do that, of course, can be very beneficial to maybe, listen, we're human, right? And so sometimes there are just things that are, even for those of us trying to do it the right way, it may be right in front of us and we're not seeing it. And everybody else in the agency may be seeing it. And for whatever reason, we have a blind spot. We have to be willing to recognize that we have blind spots and that we don't see everything for whatever reason. And so, again, having some objective voices inside the agency, which I think is valuable too. And I know that's not exactly what we're talking about, but I've learned the value, Mike, and myself and a couple of my commanders to talk to those informal leaders, those other people in the agency that we know we can trust and will give us the truth, for the right reasons, and be willing to go, okay, what are you seeing that I'm not, right? Those sources internally. And it's the same thing when you have somebody from the outside come in sometimes too and spend a little time, or just being there for a day can objectively go, yep, just making you aware you might want to put this on your radar.
This has taken us down a little rabbit hole that I'm excited about. I think that I'm big fans of Greg Williams and Brian Marin from over on the Human Behavior podcast. And one of the things that they try to hammer home is that people often talk about, well, this was totally out of the blue. No one saw this coming. It's a true rarity whenever something happens, that there was no indication that it was coming. That there are always clues out there. It's just whether or not we are looking for the clues and are we receptive to the clues? Because internally, in the case you're talking about, this was not a new member to the organization. This was somebody who had been with the organization for a long time. So it wasn't really a change in behavior or character. It was just, it got to the point, quite honestly, where they didn't have an option to deal with it.
Well, and of course, there's numerous analogies and true life stories. The one that comes to mind immediately, and we've taught this before in some of our classes with command presence as an illustration. But you go back to the original shuttle disaster, right? And you watch I think it's a 3-part documentary on Netflix, which was fascinating and scary at the same time. But the O-ring, and the people listening don't know what I'm talking about, just go Google the O-ring issue with, I think it was Columbia, right?
Challenger.
I'm sorry, Challenger was Columbia was the second one.
Yep.
Challenger was the first one. And so, to your point, people were trying to point out to the appropriate leaders, we have a problem here. This is not a big deal now, but it could be a big deal later. And the right people would not listen. And ultimately, we had a tremendous disaster. And then what's scary about that is that something similar in a different way with Columbia happened several years later, where, people weren't willing to listen. And sometimes you can be, you have people who don't listen. Okay, not a big deal. But to your point, Mike, usually when you have the big issue, the big problem, and you start looking back, hindsight being 2020, and you go, yeah, we missed several opportunities along the way to try to, get ahead of this or correct this or eliminate this problem and not end up where we are now. And interesting enough, with the space shuttle thing in NASA, and if anybody's been keeping up, I am a little bit of a nerd when it comes to the space stuff. I've always loved that. And of course, we've got these 2 astronauts that are up on the International Space Station that are stuck. But I heard one of the executives of NASA the other day when they said, we're going to go ahead and leave them there till February, which really sucks for them, right? They weren't planning on doing that. They were going to be there like a week or two. But what they said was, and he even said it, Mike, I don't know if you saw it or not, but he even said, we've had issues in the past where, and I'm paraphrasing here, where we took some unnecessary risk and didn't do the right thing, and it ended up being a disaster. So this time we're not even going to take that chance. We don't trust this ship enough, so we're going to bring the ship back unmanned. And my point being that after 2 disasters, this guy's going, we finally learned from this, right? And so the goal as leaders is to, as much as we can, avoid the disasters the first time. Sometimes we can't avoid it, but what you said is so right. Oftentimes we have opportunities early on to prevent that or to move things in a different direction, or sometimes just remove that cancer, right? So surgically remove whatever the cancer is, and we miss that again because of blind spots, because of sometimes leaders just not, starting with me and our team, not doing what we should have done in the first place, and that can be problematic, obviously.
Well, I've been told that as long as you tell somebody that you're stealing their stuff, it's not plagiarism. So I'm putting you on notice. I'm stealing your term there, the organizational terrorist.
Yes.
I think that's such a graphic way of illustrating the impact that these people have when they're not dealt with. And the truth is, if they had been dealt with earlier on, then they may not have gotten to that level and they could have been salvaged. But I think one of the hardest things to do is recognizing when the person becomes dangerous to the organization, then action has to be taken.
Absolutely. And, it's especially detrimental when that person is in a leadership role. And, there's a perception that honestly we've earned sometimes as leaders in this profession, and probably leaders in any profession, is that those at a higher level don't get held to the same standards when it comes to accountability. We're willing to look away more, and that really hurts the entire agency, because if anything, we should have a higher level of standard, even more accountability for those that we entrust in leadership roles, because we're the ones that are supposed to be modeling what it looks like, right? And so I have had an experience, and I'm not going to go obviously in details, but there was one situation where as a new leader in this role, and there was that person in a leadership role. And so the goal has to be, first, kind of what you alluded to, all right, let's sit down and give them the opportunity to make this right. What I have learned is sometimes people that are bad leaders or even that organizational terrorist, they don't even realize the negative impact they're having on people, because nobody's ever actually sat down to have that courageous conversation to say, look, these are the expectations and you're not meeting them and this is what's happening. So there is that reclamation idea of, hey, we can get somebody on the right track. And so I do believe that has to be the first option, is to educate, and here's the problem, but here's a path to change this. You can make this better. There's still a way. This is obviously going beyond unethical, illegal, immoral stuff, right? So there is hope there in this particular situation that I'm thinking of that was presented, and this person was never going to go down the right path. That was clear. And so eventually then you start building the case, documentation, counseling sessions, discipline, whatever else, to where you eventually have what you need to just remove that person from the team, from the organization, whatever that may be. And at that point, you do send a message. It's the right thing, because they're preventing progress in the organization, especially when they're put in influential positions. But kind of going back to what you said before, but also it's the messaging that's being sent to the organization that we do see this. I see you, right? I see you, team. And this is a problem. And we ultimately have taken care of it. Unfortunately, on the government side, sometimes that takes longer than we would like. There's a process there. And it's one of those things, we all know this person shouldn't be here, but still there's sometimes a process that has to happen to try to rectify that situation. But at the end of the day, it was a tremendous message in this example I'm thinking of to our team that we're not going to put up with this, especially in a leadership role.
Well, Chief, I think when you outline the pathway to reclamation and they choose not to take it, then that person earns their way out of your organization.
Absolutely.
I think where I think things are most problematic is when we ignore it. They never get that chance for reclamation, and they exit the organization, but it's after something catastrophic has happened.
Exactly. And then you're spending a lot of time cleaning up the ashes of the great fire that just happened. and that takes a long time as well. So yes, in an ideal world, we see it ahead of time. We deal with it ahead of time. And then if it doesn't get corrected the way it should, we're able to handle that O-ring issue on the shuttle before it blows up.
In Command Presence, we have an FTO program. And one of the basic principles of that program, train early, train often. When you discover an issue, address early and address it with a lot of training. And the idea is to give them all the tools they need to succeed. And if they don't, then quite honestly, that's on them. And I think it's the same thing with leaders.
Yes, and that same principle, as you said that, it popped in my mind. Like we do in any use of force, whether it's a major use of force or it's just a hands-on, soft techniques type thing. We do a review. We have a review process, and one of the reasons why we do that is if we look at the video, read the report, whatever, and say, okay, overall, even in this situation, no harm, no foul, everybody's okay. But to your point, is there a training opportunity there to get even better from that? And so that idea that you're talking about in general of always reviewing, always looking, always making sure that we are looking for opportunities, to go back to that phrase, make it better, to where we do intervene and train when necessary. So hopefully, to use a Barney Fife phrase, when you nip it in the bud early on, and then you don't have the big issue later on. Again, none of this is 100% foolproof, but it definitely increases your odds of avoiding the big stuff when you handle the small stuff early on.
If you look at it from a broad perspective, I think that leading properly affords you more options and opportunities. When we fail to lead appropriately, that's when decisions and actions are forced upon us.
Yes, absolutely. And we joke about oftentimes how we're constantly putting out fires, right? And a lot of those fires we have no control over, regarding, our bosses, the people we report to, citizens, things like that, just things that happen as leaders. We all can relate to that. But some of those fires, we may have had a hand directly or indirectly in allowing to burn to a point to where it became a problem, instead of, trying to put that fire out early on when it was just an ember or a few sparks, and we could have potentially avoided where we are now. And so we certainly don't help ourselves sometimes when we create a lot more leadership stress for ourselves when we don't stay on top of things and try to handle things early on. And please don't get me wrong. I'm sitting there saying this like, I've got this mastered, and I can promise you I do not. And there are still times where I'm like, yep, we missed that one, or I missed that one. And we had a avoidable situation that has become unavoidable now, unfortunately. And so, as I often say when I teach, I get it. This is much easier said than done, because we get busy, we're distracted, we've got a lot of things on our plate. And so sometimes it's hard to see everything. But I think that's also why it's so important, Mike, that we build a leadership team of people around us on our team. I can't, I lead 270 police, fire, 911. I can't see everybody all the time and see what's going on, good or bad. And so I think it's important that you get like-minded leaders with the right perspective. Again, the goal being to try to help leaders be more effective, and at the same time make sure that we have a healthy culture as an organization. So that's why it's so crucial that we are putting the right leaders on the team with that right mindset, because we can't do it all ourselves, and we need a team effort in doing that.
And speaking of having to put out fires, a little bit ago, you talked about you have to get everybody in the organization on the same page. All of your folks work in Alpharetta, but they work different shifts. So they literally, they might as well be working in another state for how often you see a lot of your folks. But, in the private sector, you often will have businesses that have offices in a bunch of different places. Or maybe it's not even that. Maybe you just have a remote workforce. And so when you talk about getting people on the same page, it's really about, and we're not a military organization, but it's just, I think it describes it best. It's about ensuring that the people that we work with have an understanding of commander's intent, the why behind we're doing what we're doing. Is that accurate?
Absolutely, it is. And I wonder sometimes about some of these corporate leaders that are, people all over the state, the country, the world, and the challenges with that. And so this is where a part of leadership is extremely difficult. And again, thinking about that leading without rank class, and Mike, we do the same thing. We say, give us your greatest challenges that you see regarding leadership in our profession, and communication is always a topic that comes up, right? And so we don't do that well sometimes. And so thinking about that from the top, I feel like one of my roles is to, again, that CRO constantly have to work with our team, our leadership team, to communicate and to give commander's intent, to your point, and to try to get creative with that, but also throughout the organization. We all understand the frustration, and there's no ill intent here, but I can sit with our command staff, and I can say one message. This is the intent. This is what we're going to do, right? And let's take my 3 battalion chiefs on the fire side, or my captain on the police side. Again, all well intentioned, but they're going to go out with that message. And what happens sometimes, that message gets slanted a little bit differently or presented a little bit differently, and before you know it, again, you have almost different messages being put out to the team, which creates confusion and problems in the organization. And so that, to me, is one of our greatest challenges. That's why it's so important, I think, that commander's intent, that my command staff hears it from me regularly, but also that the entire organization. That's why we've tried to learn to get creative with things like the first Monday of every month, I video a Chiefs chat. It's only 7 or 8 minutes, but it's hitting on some of the topics organization-wide that are of interest, hopefully. And so it's one message out of one mouth, right? And that's coming out to everybody. I used to do a once a year, a kind of a state of the department in March, and we did it this past March. And it's, hey, here's what's happening in 2024. Here's our strategic plan. Here's some hot topics, that kind of thing. And, people would show up, and we'd feed them lunch, and there'd be a chance for them to ask questions. Well, somebody brought up the suggestion afterwards, like, listen, this is informative and good. Can we do this more? Well, meeting physically that's a chore, and trying to get people together for that, obviously. So again, next week, now once a quarter, we're kind of trying this. I'm doing a Teams meeting once a quarter. Throw it out to anybody in the organization. We're going to hop on Teams, and here's a quarterly update on what's going on. And again, not everybody chooses to do that. We'll have several get on there, and it's a chance for them to ask questions. My point in all this, Mike, is that we have to be so intentional in trying to create opportunities for one central message. Again, that commander's intent. And listen, commander's intent is, yes, ultimately I'm the commander, and that's my perspective. But for us as, again, transformational leaders, it's a team oriented goal. It's something we work on as a team to come up with what's best for the organization. But that whenever that happens, there still has to be one message effectively put out there. And communication is one of the most difficult things to do effectively and consistently. It's an infinite game. You never get to a point where you're doing that. But that's why we have to work so hard as leaders to constantly and consistently, communicate and try to find creative ways of doing that. And again, we've gotten better in our organization, but I know we're still not there yet. And we continue to always try to look for effective ways to do that.
Well, one of the things that you've done in your organization is you have this information center that's been started. So why don't you take a second, if you would, and just explain what that initiative was and the purpose that it serves with your people?
It's funny because I remember 7.5 years ago coming in the door, and one of our now one of my majors, which is basically a deputy chief, who's very technology oriented. We talked about this a while back when you started hearing that phrase, that term, real time crime centers, and how we want to do that. And here we are. In the last year or two, we finally started seeing this happen, and we call it an ARTIC, a real-time intelligence center. At the end of the day, we were able, I got our city council on board to support it. We were able to create a leadership position. I've got a couple of civilian positions now. Again, we're slowly rolling this out, but it is the real-time crime center concept. We're trying to be a little more intentional, and again, using that intelligence. We want to also have a data platform that's a part of that. So you got the typical, a couple of folks watching, cameras and helping officers, as they respond to calls. And, we have all, LPRs. We all know the technology now for those that aren't in the profession. License plate readers has been one of the greatest tools to be developed in our profession over the last decade. And so you've got people now that are kind of taking all this various information coming in, be it video, be it ideally intelligence information, things like that, and helping utilize that into more of a one centralized package to help equip the officers, especially that are out there doing the job. It's, especially in this day and age where we all know the hiring and retention issues that we're having. Sometimes technology is a force multiplier. It really is. And helps us hopefully create more efficient and quicker ways to respond effectively. And listen, we are early on in this, and our vision for this actually it's interesting. Just this week this happened. So we are in the same county with Atlanta, but we're north of Atlanta. We're in what's called North Fulton County, and there's 5 agencies that we all work well together. And the other thing this kind of we're seeing needed in law enforcement is a combination of resources. And like myself and these 4 other agencies, we work very well together. The chiefs meet together once a month. We have a great relationship. And one of the goals was this real-time, intelligence center. We should do this regionally, right? Like we should all try to bring in resources. We have another agency here near us, Cobb County, that's a much larger agency, but they've modeled this and done it very well. Kudos to Captain Hull and his team over there, where Cobb County has their real-time crime center. It's a very large center, but they're allowing some of the cities to send people in the county to be a part of that, and they're all working together as a team. And so just this week, I got a call from one of the chiefs in a neighboring agency say, hey, I got a position starting in October in our new budget that we're going to get approved in a civilian, and they're going to send that civilian over, and they're going to start working. So it's slowly working toward let's partner up with our other agencies around us. But the general goal of it, Mike, is to take anything we can take in, information from the officers, information from the citizens, information from technology that we have, the technology platform we have in the city, bring that together in one center, manage that effectively, and get that to the officers, as quickly and efficiently as possible to help them do their job. We're, a lot of agencies are utilizing drones. We have drones, but we don't really have a drone responder program. That's something we're looking at too. So it's still very early on. In my mind, this is where we need to be in law enforcement. Again, there's a lot of agencies that are small out there. I mean, I teach in our chief school once every 6 weeks for new chiefs, and we get these South Georgia agencies. The chief is the chief, and the meter reader, and the dog catcher, and everything else, right? And he's out patrolling, and he's just him and 2 other people. They don't have those kind of resources. But if there's something regionally in that area, if they're near a larger city where they could have something kind of like Cobb County's doing and what we want to do long term, they can still benefit from that. And I think that's why we have to get out of our own little silos and be willing to spread the love, if you will. We're fortunate in Alpharetta to be well supported and to be honestly, financially, we're very blessed. And so we should be willing to utilize that to help tap into other, communities around us as well. And I think that's got to be a regional approach, if you will. I mean, you've got major cities. We traveled out to Beverly Hills last year to look at their real-time crime center, their drone program. And of course, Beverly Hills, they're 5 square miles and have 150 officers and a $100 million budget, right? None of us can relate to that, right? That is completely, but we saw the effectiveness of how the tools work and how, again, the officers, their rate of arrest on crimes in progress is through the roof, because as soon as one happens, or even before one happens, when you see unusual activity and the guy looking at the screen can go, hey, 245 down on 5th and 9, you got a group of people there, you might want to head that way, right? But even when something does happen with the drone and with all the cameras they have and everything, within seconds, they can guide officers on where to be, what to do. And another big part about it too, Mike, and to me, actually, this is one of the biggest parts of it, a layer of safety for our officers as well. If we can help them see a little bit more about what they're rolling into, give them a camera view or a drone view or whatever, again, that's critical information coming in, that if we can get that and get that to them, that can help them be a little more strategic in how they approach a situation, which, of course, as you know, is very much a safety issue. Just this last week, we've buried 2 here in Metro Atlanta, one on a domestic and one on a warrant service. And it reminds us, again, 2 situations where typically you'd be like, pretty standard stuff. And next thing you know, we've lost 2 officers. So it reminds you, again, you never know what you're walking into or driving into or responding to. And so utilizing technology to help create a little bit of a safer approach. I mean, the job's always going to be dangerous, but if we can give them extra information or extra eyes, right, of what we're seeing, or even put it on their MDT, their laptop, and their cards they're approaching, that can help keep them safer, which, of course, is something that's very important to all of us.
And from a leadership perspective, information, no matter the industry, makes it safer for our people. Our people
Absolutely.
will make better decisions with better information. But you talked about it, you alluded to it earlier. You have to be willing as a leader to share information. It really does make things safer for people. If you have more information as a stockbroker, you're probably going to make better purchases. You're probably going to sell at the more appropriate time. And so just as it is in law enforcement, if I make my officers safer, my citizens are also safer. Well, in private industry, if I make it safer, if I give them more information and they're making safer decisions, then our investors are safer. It requires a willingness on the leader's part to share information and be intentional about getting good information for their folks.
Information's key in any industry, right? And the less information you have, the more you're flying blind, if you will, which is dangerous, for all of us in whatever industry you're in. So more information means more ability to be as prepared and as efficient and as effective as possible. No doubt about it.
When you look at your real time, that's another aspect of it. Information is only valuable if it's relevant and timely. I think that as leaders, that requires a different type of management, a different type of leadership to push out information in such a manner that it can be used, but then allow the people who receive the information, the people on the front lines, to actually make decisions based on that information and the context that they see it in at the time. But that requires you to train your people appropriately, doesn't it?
It does. You train them appropriately, and it's interesting. That is a challenge. As we all know, there are challenges managing multi-generational workforces, right? And so you got the old school 20-year plus veteran that has been, policing a certain way for a long time, and technology is not necessarily their cup of tea, if you will. And then you got the 22-year-old we just hired and sent to the academy, and they're all about the technology, right? But either way, we have to get them operating under the same principles of how we're going to approach this. And honestly, a big part of this too, Mike, is we have to constantly work at creating trust with our community. And there's always that, kind of that big brother thing. And as far as people being concerned about that, I remember when we first brought license plate readers to Alpharetta, and I went before council to purchase our first ones, and it was kind of new to them. And I had a councilman, and he was a supporter. He was a good guy. So I didn't take this as an attack or anything, but, he started giving some examples of, could you not, spy on people? Could you not, center in on a tag and look at, who's at the liquor store and things like that, just some examples. And I was like, well, yes, we could do that, but I had to make a bold statement at that point. I said, listen, with technology, and I'd already explained the benefits and how beneficial it can be and help us in what we're doing. I said, there's going to come a point, sir, where either you trust me and us or you don't. And so to that point, we have to constantly earn that trust. And that's where we have to make sure our people are trained to use this technology the right way. And again, that we can be transparent. Body cameras is a great example of how, thankfully, officers at first were like, I don't know about this, and now I just heard one of my lieutenants the other night in roll call. I went by roll call and he was talking about a call from the previous night. And he's a guy that's been doing this for years. And he said it again. I've heard him say it before. He pointed to his body camera. He said, listen, this is one of the best tools we've ever gotten. And that perspective on that technology has changed now. And that's what we preach is like, listen, this helps you when you do your job and do it well. If there is an accusation that's made, this helps, show that you did the right thing. And so sometimes it takes a while to get people there with technology, but it's the same thing with this. As we're rolling it out, we got some folks that are all about it, utilizing it, and some that are like, I don't know about that. And, as we know, cops can be negative sometimes. And so it's going to take a while to get them there. But a big part of that, to your point, is we have to be training them and hopefully showing them how this is going to help them do their job even more effectively. And I don't want to say make it easier for them, but honestly, now with again, the LPRs and the information that we can get from technology, it really does make it, I'll say efficient, not easier, more efficient if we can just teach them how to utilize it. So that is a process, and it is something that we do have to train. And we have a phenomenal leader on our technology team that's leading this, and there's a very strategic approach to rolling this out. And it's taking some time. And that's frustrating for me sometimes. I want to be like, let's do this now, but that's not always the best way to do it, right?
Right. Well, as we're getting close to wrapping things up here, I do want to bring forward that one of our beliefs at Command Presence is that iron sharpens iron, and that we should be striving to make each other better. But you took it a step further than most people do, because you actually sat down and you wrote a book sharing your experiences and sharing your wisdom. Tell us about the book, if you will.
Yeah, Compelling Force Leadership. It came from a phrase, actually, when I was teaching and doing some work with Command Presence and some other things I was doing. Came across a definition one day of influence, which again, transformational leadership, a big part of that is one of the 4 tenets is idealized influence. And that's what leadership's all about. That's what we teach at Command Presence. That's that whole leading without rank. You don't have to have bars and stars and rank and titles to be a leader. One of the greatest ways you lead is through influence. And so I came across this definition of influence, and it was talking about how you can be a compelling force. And that just really stuck with me. Like, wow, that's what I want to be, is a compelling force leader that is influential and helping people follow me. That whole level 2 of John Maxwell's 5 levels of leadership, that level 2, people follow you not because they have to, level 1, but level 2 because they want to, right? They believe
right.
where you're leading them, kind of thing. And so, I took that and then just kind of jotted down some notes. I never in my life thought about writing a book. I don't have the patience for that. I'm not even that good at writing, honestly. And so I did that, and then a couple other topics that I'm really passionate about is purpose, being a purpose-driven leader, and passion. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at the 3 P's of leadership, which is transformational leadership, and that's people, purpose, and passion. I was like, well, that dog will hunt, to use a southern phrase there. And so I thought, that really, and that's kind of some of the stuff we teach in Command Presence and what I preach as a leader. And so I was like, let me just sit down. And one day I kind of sat down, wrote out an outline, and said, I think there's something to this. And in my mind, it was something I can, when I teach and talk, whether it's in our organization or locally, or if I am doing something with Command Presence, like, this is something I could hand to people, give people, they could buy it and take it even further. And so I just sat down and just started typing, and it took a few months just to kind of type out a draft. And what I did was I did about 3 chapters. And there were 3 people that I thought of that, like, listen, I want an honest opinion. You're a reader. You're really good at what you do, and I wanted their input. Is this a good idea? Should I keep going, or just, as my friend say, stop? You're wasting your time. And Mike, you were one of those guys. I sent that to you and said, please pick it apart. Again, very rough draft. And you and the 2 others that I had done that with both said, no, I think you got something. keep going with it. And I think, I even sent you the final draft before we even got into publishing. Went to a publisher locally here in Alpharetta who is very pro-law enforcement, but they're also a national company, so they're legit. And I did the same thing with them, and they came back and said, no, this is really good. And one of the things I liked about what I remember in the conversation with the owner, he said, listen, a lot of leaders come in and they write and they're almost like they're talking down to you, or they're coming across as the expert and this is the only way. And they said, we appreciate the fact that you seem to have a little bit more of a humility, if you will, and more of that transparency of don't necessarily have it all figured out, but these are some things I've learned along the way that seem to be the right way to approach it. And the idea is people, purpose, and passion. I believe those are three key components to being an effective leader, but you got to kind of figure out what that looks like for you and your organization. So I give some practical stuff. I give some ideas, what works for us, what I've seen, what I've read. Like you, I'm an avid reader, and so a lot of the stories I share are stories where I've learned from other great leaders. Eisenhower, Michael Dowling, who was the CEO of the largest healthcare organization in New York State during COVID, and some things he did engagement-wise. A study done by Yale on purpose-driven, workforce, things like that. So things I've just learned from others. Honestly, that's one of the greatest things about being a reader. And Mike, we both preach readers are leaders, obviously, as Matt has said, and that's because you get to learn from other leaders throughout, history, honestly, and what has worked well for them. Roosevelt's another one, and I love reading about him. And so I took all that, so my experience, kind of my ideas, but just honestly things I've gained from other leaders that I've worked with and more than that, read about, and just kind of threw it together in the book. And I guess it's been just over a year. It was July 2023 when it was published.
We would be remiss if we didn't talk about this. And it also goes back to, you talked about humility, because if you weren't humble about it before, one of the people that made your book as successful as it is your proofreader, also known as your wife. She held you to a standard, didn't she?
She did. She's phenomenal in more ways than I can share in just a few minutes on the podcast. She is. I've been so blessed by her, because she's supported through, this profession, which is difficult, especially, and the challenges and stress that come with leadership roles sometimes. But so I'd asked her about it, ran it by her, and she was like, absolutely. She's the one that pushed me to go and get my doctorate. And so she's been a great supporter. And so, yes, she's extremely smart and extremely well-spoken, well-written. And it's so funny because I sent the original, script, the draft, to the publishers. They pay people to actually, go through there and look at it grammatically, and they made several changes and encouraged me to, and I did. But then I had her look at it, and it was like, wow, I'm not even close to done yet. And to her credit, make it better. She was like, I would do this. And she was right. First of all, nothing against my publisher, but they even missed some basic things. Number one, grammatically. And then number two, just the way to try to communicate in a manner that is effective. I had one chapter in there more research and data driven. And to her point, she was like, this sticks out a little bit regarding the rest of the book, and gave me some recommendations. And so I changed it. And so, yes, she helped me hopefully take it to a different level, which would have never happened without her. So
I certainly appreciate her work, because the book is fantastic, and we'll make sure we put the links to it in the episode notes as we end the show, as we do each week. I want to give you my key takeaways to make sure I got it right. All right. So feel free to correct me if you find out that Mike again got something wrong. Now, first takeaway: developing leaders and serving as a leader, you need to be both intentional and opportunistic. Take advantage of the opportunities given to you to invest in your people.
Yep. Sounds right.
Outside voices, different perspective. Ideally, just like you did with your book. You didn't just publish the book without outside input. So outside voices.
Absolutely.
Oh, I love this one. I love how you put this. You have to get everybody on the same page. That's often best accomplished with one message from one mouth.
As much as possible. No, easier said than done, but when you have opportunities, yes, be intentional and trying to at least consistently have that opportunity, again, utilizing technology to try to get one message out from one voice to everybody.
The organizational terrorist. Take action early.
Yes, 100%.
And then I know this is one of your favorite things. Be the chief reminding officer. that's where you can make the greatest impact as a leader oftentimes.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I love Lencioni. He's one of my favorite authors. I recommend all of his books, honestly, but that's something that I read from him years ago, and it stuck with me. The importance, again, in our role of, chief reminding officer. I mentioned purpose earlier. Our mission, we're very mission minded in our organization. Our mission, our purpose, our fundamentals, constantly reminding them of what matters and why. And that starts with me as the CEO to be the CRO.
And then last takeaway here, and I think this one right here is really important. Folks, listen to me. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. There's a saying out there that knowledge is power. And that certainly is true, but information shared is empowering, and that's the role of a leader.
Absolutely. I mentioned the Make It Better downstairs, upstairs where our command staff is. I have words right outside of my office to remind all our commanders in police, fire, and 911 that says add value to our people. And one of the greatest ways I've learned over the years that we can do that is through effective communication and sharing of information. People feel valued when they feel like this is my team, I'm included. And again, I've learned along the way there's really very little that we can't share and shouldn't be sharing because it is their team. It's not my team. It's their team. They're the ones that are out there doing the most important job. And it's certainly beneficial to them. And again, adding value to them to be informed as much as possible.
Fantastic. Well, Chief, I can't thank you enough for being here with us today. I know you're a busy guy, but I always appreciate the opportunity to sit down and talk with you.
Great talking to you as always, Mike. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
And for our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed the episode, and we sure as heck hope you did, be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast provider. You can also find this episode and all our previous episodes on our website at commandpresence.net/podcast. And you can also find us at Faces of Leadership on YouTube. Be sure to check us out and follow us on LinkedIn as we put out additional information with notices of upcoming events. We'd sure love to be able to communicate with you there. And as you go throughout the week, folks, please remember, be the leader you wish you had.